Welcome to Edit with Emmy. I'm Emmy. Why don't you grab a cup of tea or coffee and come sit down with me? This episode was originally supposed to be about adjectives and adverbs and kind of telling you all the different kinds of categories for each of those. But two things need to happen first. One thing, adjectives and adverbs have way too many categories to do them both in the same blog and same video. So we're going to separate those into two videos, and those will be the next two videos after this video. I've said video about 1,000 times, I think. But the really important thing that we're going to talk about today is why we need to be careful about the adjectives and adverbs and why we need to be sparing in our usage of those kinds of words. If you've been in English writer spaces for any length of time, you have probably gotten some kind of diatribe about not using adverbs and adjectives. And while that is partially true, I think sometimes those of us who've been doing this kind of writing and editing for a long time get a little bit simplistic with how we talk about it, to the point that people who don't know very much about writing yet will just completely avoid adjectives and adverbs altogether and not even learn anything about them. And then they end up with really dry, uninteresting prose. And I don't want that to happen to you. I think a really important thing that you need to know is that adverbs and adjectives exist for a reason. There are times where we actually do need those words. However, they do also muddy your language, and they can make things a little bit unnecessarily long, unnecessarily fluffy and purple. And so we need to be careful and judicious with how we do it, just like we do with the rest of writing and basically the rest of everything in life. I don't think that we talk enough about why we're not using adjectives and adverbs, why it's better to lower the amount of adjectives and adverbs that we use. One of the main reasons that you want to cut back on that is that you end up becoming a little bit sloppy with the words that you choose when you are writing with lots of adjectives and lots of adverbs. If you remember the first blog post that I did about parts of speech, you'll hopefully remember that adjectives and adverbs are descriptive words. So adjectives describe nouns and pronouns, and adverbs describe verbs. These words can be really useful, but when they're used in excessive ways, they can end up making us a little bit sloppy with our word choice. If we're able to grab a noun and then slap on an adjective to make it a little bit more specific, and we're not thinking more intentionally about the noun that we're using, then we end up with really long, kind of messy, these long description phrases with tons of adjectives that just end up falling flat when your reader reads them. And so one of the really important things one of the main reasons why we try not to use adjectives and adverbs is because oftentimes we are using those words in order to not think a little bit longer about our word choice when it comes to nouns and verbs. So, I think we're getting into the weeds a little bit, so I'm going to give you an example, and we'll try to go from there. So, we're going to write a sentence. We're writing it just normally with adverbs and adjectives and just writing what we think. So, Margie ran quickly through the green grass. Quickly is the adverb. Green is the adjective. So, the way that I would personally change this, we don't really know in this instance. She's running quickly Is she running from fear, or is she running because she's having fun? Is she in green grass in a backyard or in a big field or something along those lines? We don't have all that many specifics, even though we're using adjectives and adverbs. Also, when you're talking about grass, generally you don't need to say that it's green. Unless you're trying to show that it's springtime or something. But you can do that in other ways, with wildflowers being everywhere and bees flying around, that kind of thing. You don't necessarily need the green modifier. Most people are going to assume when you talk about grass that the grass is green. And there are things like that that happen a lot with adjectives and adverbs, where we're adding a word on that doesn't need to be added because the reader is going to immediately clock that this grass is green. That's going to be their immediate thought. So you're not giving the reader anything extra. Also, saying that someone ran quickly, running is usually quick. So that, again, isn't all that specific. So if we want to give the reader more information, but we also want to use fewer words, how would you do that? I want you to take a second, pause the video, and we will come back around and talk about how to fix it. Now that you have tried on your own, figuring out what this might be, what the changes, the better changes might be, you probably had some ideas that I don't have, but I will tell you mine if you tell me yours in the comments. I will tell you mine now, though. So the way that I would fix this is Marcy raced through the field. Raced sounds a little bit more intense than ran quickly. Raced sounds like there's urgency, like something is happening that's causing her to run fast. And so she's racing, and then we say through the field, and so there's a feeling of openness. There's a large space that she's running through, and it also maybe doesn't have a lot of trees, because usually a field is like a big open space of green grass. So you're immediately giving your reader a more specific picture of the surroundings that they're in, and also a more specific, like, emotional picture of what's going on with this character. And you use 2 fewer words than you did in the first sentence. When you're going through your own writing and you're finding lots of adverbs and adjectives, don't just delete them. Some of them will be necessary, but also don't just delete them because the noun and verb that you have there might have a more specific replacement that is what you're trying to do by adding those adverbs and adjectives. Words like ran, walk, talk, those words have a lot of different replacements that are a little bit more descriptive, either emotionally, physically, any of those things. There are replacements for those nouns and verbs that will explain the situation that your reader is in a better way, in a more specific way, without muddying up your sentences with a ton of adjectives and adverbs. So that's your first step, is to go through your writing and see if you can find any nouns and verbs to replace. The other thing, though, is that there are some nouns that just don't have a good replacement. For example, the noun stairs. Stairs don't really have another word. There's not really another word for stairs. Stairs are just stairs. So in order to give a little bit more description and a little more specificity to your sentence, you are going to need an adjective. For stairs, you might have some creaky stairs, some creaky old stairs. Those are acceptable adjectives to add in because they do add specificity and they do help your reader understand more of the setting. When we're talking about a refrigerator, that also doesn't have a good replacement. There are a bunch of different kinds of refrigerators. They all look very different. Some of them are fancy new technology. Some of them are old and like from the 80s, not really that interesting. Some of them are from the 50s and are really cool and have lots of different colors. And so there's a lot of different refrigerators out there, and it might be important to your story for your reader to know what the refrigerator looks like. And you can't fix that by changing the noun. So in that case, you're going to say that you have a vintage refrigerator, or that it's a green vintage refrigerator, or something along those lines. Or that it's a fancy smart TV refrigerator. I don't know. I've never used one, so I don't know how I would describe it. But anyway, all that being said, there are some nouns and some verbs that just don't have a good replacement. And in that case, you'll want to keep those adjectives and adverbs there. Just use your discernment about whether or not you should use the words that are there. And your editor will also have some ideas and some opinions about whether or not those words should be there. All in all, the advice that you should use fewer adverbs and adjectives doesn't mean to just delete them all. It just means to look through your nouns and your verbs and make sure that they're more specific if you are using a lot of adverbs and adjectives. That's the most likely reason that you're using so many adverbs and adjectives. So keep a thesaurus nearby, whether that's an online thesaurus or an actual physical thesaurus, and really make use of that. You'll find much better words, and it'll be a lot stronger. Your language will be a lot stronger. Your writing will be a lot stronger. And you'll make a better book, better story. All right. Your writing assignment for this week is to go back through your old writing and comb through it for those adverbs and adjectives. See if you're noticing any places that you're using a lot of those descriptive words, and then try and see if you have any nouns or verbs that you can make stronger. I'm sure if you are having an issue with the emotional depth and the description in your story, you likely are not using the strongest nouns and verbs that you could. And so if that is a struggle for you to get across the emotion and the description of your setting and the description of actions, the most likely reason that that's happening is that your words are not specific enough and your sentences are not strong enough. So go through that old writing, even if it's something you wrote today. Go through it, comb through it for those adjectives and adverbs, and see what you might be able to do to make those nouns and verbs a little more specific and a little bit stronger so that your reader feels immersed in your world. That's all for this week. I hope that this makes sense, and I hope that you have a good time with your assignment for this week. Next week, we will be talking about adjectives. There are 13 categories of adjectives, so we will be handling those in one video by itself, and then we'll be handling adverbs right after that. So, I hope you have a great week of writing. I'll see you next time.